Okay, so we're going to dive into one of the most influential stories ever told, but probably not in the way you're used to. Let's just put the whole question of faith on a shelf for a minute. Instead, we're going to see if we can uncover a practical guide for living, for right here, right now, that's been hiding in this ancient text all along.
For a lot of us, the supernatural stuff is a real sticking point. A virgin birth, walking on water, rising from the dead. If those are total non-starters for you, does that mean the whole story is just irrelevant?
Well, maybe not. This is exactly the approach a Harvard theologian named Harvey took. And he asked this really fascinating question. What if we just temporarily bracket the miracles? What kind of timeless wisdom can we find for our very modern, very complicated lives?
What's so cool about this idea is how much it's like psychotherapy. I mean, think about it. When you're trying to heal from something, the goal isn't always about proving exactly what happened in the past. It's about building a story that helps you make sense of what you're going through right now so you can move forward. We can use that exact same idea here. So with that framework in mind, let's jump to the very beginning of the story. And we're not starting with a miracle in a manger. No, we're starting with something that sounds, honestly, kind of boring. A long, long list of names.
The Gospel of Matthew kicks right off with the genealogy of Jesus, and the author's goal is super clear: to connect him to all the great patriarchs of Jewish history, to basically establish his credentials from the get-go. And yeah, on the surface, it's pretty much what you'd expect. It's a classic, male-dominated list of kings and prophets, the who's who of ancient Israel, you know? It's all designed to shout, this guy's important, he's legit. But if you look just a little bit closer, hidden in this long list of men are the names of 4 women. Now, in that society, just including any woman was really unusual. But the choice of these 4 women, oh, that was absolutely radical. It was a deliberate choice, and it sends a massive signal. All right, so let's crack this code, because their stories aren't just little footnotes. They're the key to understanding the entire story that's about to unfold. So first up, you've got Tamar. She was widowed twice, and then her powerful father-in-law basically cast her aside. So she comes up with this wild plan. She disguises herself as a prostitute to trick him into giving her the heir she was owed. I mean, it was a huge risk, but it worked. She secured her place. Then you have Rahab. And she wasn't just a prostitute. She was from the enemy city Jericho. She committed what her own people would have called treason. She chose to hide Israelite spies, risking immediate execution to side with the outsiders. Next on the list is Ruth, another total outsider, a foreigner from Moab, a rival land that nobody trusted. By all rights, she should have been rejected, but she wasn't. She was welcomed in, but only because of her incredible loyalty to her mother-in-law, choosing a life of uncertainty among a foreign people. And finally, there's Bathsheba, and this is just incredible. The text doesn't even give her a name. It just calls her the wife of Uriah. She was the woman King David saw from his roof, summoned to his palace, and then he had her husband killed in battle to cover it all up. A victim of this immense abuse of power, and yet her story is right there in the official record. So let's just stop and think about this for a second. A deceiver, a prostitute, a foreigner, and an adulteress. By putting these 4 women, these outsiders, these survivors, these incredibly complex figures right at the start of the family tree, it's like the author is screaming from page 1, hey, this story isn't just for the perfect and the powerful, it's for everyone, especially those living on the edges. Okay, so let's take this same way of reading, the same ethical lens, and apply it to another super famous story. We're heading out to the desert for the temptation in the wilderness. So instead of a literal, supernatural fight with the devil, let's look at this as a powerful allegory for 3 big ethical struggles that, honestly, you and I face all the time. First temptation, turn stones into bread. Sure, on the surface, it's about being hungry, but the deeper meaning? It's about our obsession with turning the hard, uncertain stones of life into the guaranteed comfort of bread. It's that temptation to get rid of all risk and to control every single outcome. Second temptation, leap from the temple and have angels catch you. This is all about the lure of public approval, right? Of fame. It's that desire for validation, to pull off some big public stunt knowing that your followers, your angels, will always be there to catch you and tell you how great you are. And the third one, wow, this one might be the most dangerous.
Bow down just once to get all the power in the world. This isn't about being overtly evil, it's about that quiet little voice in your head that whispers, you know what? You've done enough. You're tired. It's time to just compromise a little, to accept things as they are. It's the temptation of just being completely worn out ethically. So, if we strip away the supernatural, what are we supposed to do with all this? How does any of this actually serve as a guide for us today?
Well, when you read these stories as ethical maps, you get this really amazing framework for life. It's basically telling us, learn to live with uncertainty instead of demanding control. Act based on your own integrity, not for likes and applause. And never, ever give in to that cynical voice that tells you your work is done. At the end of the day, here's the thing. You don't have to subscribe to the theology to get a ton of value from the psychology. It doesn't matter if you see it as divine truth or as a foundational myth. Either way, the story holds this powerful, practical, and really human map for getting through life.
And that kind of leaves you wondering, doesn't it? If we can find this kind of relevant guidance here, what other ancient stories, from any culture, any tradition, are just sitting there, waiting for us to reread them, not for what they say about the past, but for what they can teach us about right now?
You know, many of us have heard the words of Jesus our entire lives, in churches, in movies, just in the culture. They feel familiar, almost comfortable. But what if that familiarity has actually been hiding their true razor-sharp edge? What if the words we've always heard as calls for quiet, passive faith were actually a brilliant playbook for a nonviolent revolution?
I mean, take this phrase right here. It's the absolute gold standard for passive forgiveness, right? Just endure the suffering, absorb the hit, and offer peace. And it's a beautiful idea, but what if that's a profound misunderstanding of what was actually being said?
That's really the core question we're diving into. Because a lot of historians and scholars are now arguing that when you put these words back into their original, gritty context, the brutal reality of Roman occupation, they completely transform. They go from a whisper into a roar. So let's start with that cheek. We need to forget the image of someone meekly accepting a blow. Drawing on the work of scholars like Walter Wink, this act can be reframed as a powerful, seriously strategic weapon. And here's the crucial shift. The common view, the one we all know, sees it as this internal, spiritual thing. But the historical reinterpretation, it sees it as an external, political move, one designed to completely flip a power dynamic on its head. And this is the part you have to get. We're not talking about a fistfight between two equals here. In that culture, a superior, a master, a soldier, struck an inferior with the back of their right hand. It was an act of pure humiliation, of dominance. A fist, well, that was reserved for a peer, an equal. This single detail changes everything. So, check out how this works. Picture it. The aggressor hits your right cheek with a backhand. Then, you deliberately turn and offer your left. Now what? From their position, it's physically awkward, almost impossible to backhand you again. They're left with a choice. They either stop or they have to switch to a closed fist punch. And in that moment, by forcing that choice, you've non-violently forced them to treat you as a social equal. You haven't thrown a single punch, but you have absolutely won the psychological battle. You've reclaimed your dignity. Now, this logic, this idea of cleverly subverting social rules, it doesn't stop there. We see the exact same thinking in one of the most famous stories ever told, the parable of the Good Samaritan. The setup is just so key. A religious lawyer, an expert in the rules, comes up and he's trying to test Jesus. He wants to know, what are the absolute limits of my responsibility? And let's be totally clear about what this guy is asking. Who is my neighbor? It wasn't some open-hearted philosophical question. It was a legalistic trap. He was trying to draw a circle, to define who was us, and by doing that, define who was them. He was looking for a loophole in the command to love. So Jesus tells a story, and look at the characters he picks. The priest and the Levite, they are the ultimate insiders, the A-team. They are the very definition of neighbor for that lawyer. But the Samaritan? Oh no. Samaritans were a despised rival group, the absolute other, the enemy.
And here's the genius move. The lawyer asks an identity question. Who is my neighbor? Jesus completely flips it and answers with an action question. Which of these three acted like a neighbor? He just totally reframes the entire debate away from who you are to what you do.
So at the end of the day, the story isn't just a nice little lesson about helping people, even if you don't like them. It's a radical demolition of social boundaries. It's arguing that the very categories we create of us and them are the actual problem we need to solve. This revolutionary way of thinking didn't just apply to social status either. It went straight for the most powerful force in any society, money and economics.
Ah, another blockbuster quote. We've all heard this one, and it's usually explained away as, a metaphor, a poetic way of saying it's really, really hard for wealthy people to be humble.
But again, what happens when we pull this quote out of the clouds and ground it in actual history? Well, the meaning gets a whole lot sharper. It shifts from this vague spiritual warning to a very concrete, very physical critique. Get this simple piece of historical context changes the entire analogy. The eye of the needle may not have been a sewing needle at all. Some historians believe it was a nickname for a small, human-sized gate in the wall of Jerusalem. Now, a fully loaded merchant camel, piled high with goods, it just plain couldn't fit. To get through that gate, it had to be completely unburdened, all of its cargo taken off. And suddenly, the teaching becomes incredibly practical. The point isn't that being rich makes you a bad person. It's that the accumulations of wealth, the cargo, the baggage, are a literal physical burden that is incompatible with entering this new kind of community Jesus was talking about. You have to unload it all to get in.
Okay, so let's start connecting the dots here. These aren't just three clever, separate sayings. They are all interlocking pieces of a single, coherent vision for a brand new world.
I mean, when you put it all together, a really consistent picture starts to emerge. You demand personal dignity. You erase social barriers. You challenge economic inequality. And as a lot of sources point out, even the act of forgiving sins, that bypass the entire temple system's authority. It all points in exactly the same direction. This was a whole program. It challenged personal status, social identity, the economic order, and religious authority. This wasn't a blueprint for getting into the afterlife. It was a strategy to radically reorder this life, right here and right now.
And all of this, well, it brings us to the inevitable and, of course, tragic conclusion of this story.
If this interpretation is right, then Jesus wasn't executed for some abstract religious crime like blasphemy. He was executed because he was a genuine threat. His ideas, if they actually took root, could unravel the entire fabric of the social, economic, and political order that kept the powerful people, well, in power. And that really is the final, provocative thought to leave you with. If we start to see his teachings not as a path to heaven, but as a roadmap for changing the earth, it forces us to ask a totally new question. Was his death the sacrifice of a gentle lamb, or was it the predictable political elimination of a revolutionary who simply became too dangerous to ignore?